I'm Caitlin Murphy. With me today is Professor Barry, who is helping organize a discussion seminar that will be held at St. John Fisher College called Human Trafficking, a Rochester Problem Too. Thank you for joining me, Professor Barry.
Thank you, Caitlin.
First, could you start off explaining a little bit about what this event is and what it's about?
It's a day of seminars on the topic of human trafficking here in Rochester. So it'll start at 11 o'clock in the morning of a welcome, and then after that we'll have hour and 15-minute panels where people from the Rochester area and outside of the Rochester area who are expert in the field of human trafficking, especially in New York State, will come and discuss different topics such as the legal issues, law enforcement, health care and social work issues, the victims, who they are, who they aren't, and international human trafficking. I'm trying to think of, I think there's one more. Oh, and sports, and how sports events kind of draw in human trafficking issues, because even though human trafficking happens every day, it seems to get more publicity during sports events. So that's what will be happening during the day. And then the night before, we're going to be showing the movie Sold, and it's based on a young adult book by Patricia McCormick.
All right, and what dates are these?
This will be January 25th for the movie at night, and then January 26th. And the date was picked because it's a week before the Super Bowl, where oftentimes human trafficking has become more publicized than it is during the rest of the year.
All right, and I know, like, as the title says, that it's a Rochester problem too. Can you explain a little bit about how maybe people don't realize how big of an issue it could be for this city?
Well, there's this place in Rochester called the Center of Youth, and they're the ones that actually focus on the young adults who are involved in human trafficking. And since 2014, over 100 students have been housed at a place called Safe Harbor who have been involved in human trafficking. And these are the ones who come forth, or they're able to find and help. But it happens because oftentimes young adults want to get a close connection with someone. And so they use things like Craigslist or a back page, and they post different submissions about themselves, and then it gets into the wrong hands, and then one thing leads to another. An adult sees it, contacts the youth, and then brings the youth in and says, oh, I'll be your friend, I'll do this, and then it goes into the human trafficking. And I think what we don't realize is that it happens here a lot in Rochester. Oftentimes if youth are afraid to mention anything because they're ashamed or they can't get out of it. And oftentimes it happens with labor. We don't realize that sometimes with our migrant workers or different hotel areas or salons, beauty salons, nail salons often have people who have been trafficked, and they're afraid to speak because the traffickers have either kept them hidden in a place, or they have contacts to where these people's families are, and they threaten them. So it's an issue that hits every city, and it's happening here in Rochester more and more.
All right, and how did the event become, like, how did you guys get together and decide to organize have this take place at St. John Fisher?
Well, it started at a learning community meeting when I found out that the book Sold had been turned into a movie after we had been Skyping with the author. And Dr. Dunbar in religious studies said, well, gee, maybe we should have a conference or something. And he had been involved in a Skyping experience that I had with my students and Dr. Lazadu's students on human trafficking. And that went over so well with the students that Dr. Dunbar said, maybe we should have a little conference. Well, one thing leads to another. The next thing you know, we decided the movie would be a good thing to have the night before. And then during the summer, I was able to get various people to be on different panels. So that's how it came about.
And can you give us a couple examples of some of the people that are coming?
Well, it was Tanya Connolly-Parmalee, who works as a child advocate in Rochester, New York. She is a lawyer, and she's a supervisor of the litigation for children and juvenile agencies here. Also John Holkel, who is the U.S. Attorney for human trafficking here in Rochester. Moses Robinson, who's also been on WXXI, who's also a policeman who works with human trafficking victims. People are coming from the Rochester Regional Coalition Against Human Trafficking, and representatives will be from the Center for Youth and from Safe Harbor and Angels of Mercy. Angels of Mercy is an organization that funds different educational, informational sessions for human trafficking, and also collects dresses for young women, young girls in the third world countries who are very subject to human trafficking. But if they're dressed well, the human traffickers will ignore them. Another representative will be Jennifer Worley, who is a human trafficking victim herself, a survivor. She teaches at Rochester Institute of Technology, and she set up the paper bag ladies who go around and try to find people who are being human trafficked and give them food, as well as giving homeless people foods. So those are some of the people who are going to be involved in the day's events.
All right, and going back to, I know you said how the Super Bowl and other athletic events are big days for human trafficking, the numbers are large. Do they have an idea as to why that is?
Probably because it's easy to get transitional workers at that time, so that hotels can bring in more workers and not necessarily know where they're coming from. Just, I'm going to have it, just like sometimes you do for seasonal workers. They will have them in the hotels working at different things. And for the human trafficking sex part, that's a big day where people are there and one thing leads to another and says, oh, I have a friend who has a friend who has a friend, and that's where the women start coming in. And so those are the events where prostitution takes a lot of publicity, or not, has prostitution happens then, but there's also this segment of human trafficking where people think, oh, I'm going to become a model for this event, but I'm not. I'm really going to be traded for sex and different things. So those are the events where there's a lot of people, and that sometimes causes the human trafficking situations to escalate.
All right, and just the last question is, why do you think it's important for students to go to this event and take part and learn more about these things?
Well, I think because it's happening here in Rochester, and for so many of our students, we don't realize something that's happening in the community itself. So I think this is a situation that's not going to go away. And to bring it on campus and just to make them aware of it, I think will just broaden their horizons as to what is out there in the world. Also, it affects so many different majors. I mean, nursing students might have patients who are human trafficking victims, and this will give them a chance to at least say, well, how can I help you in a better way? Political science might be involved in some of the government organizations that will clamp down on human trafficking. In sociology, just looking at why people do things and thinking about society. How do we view these? Do we view all of these human trafficking victims as prostitutes, or are they victims themselves, and who do we need to prosecute? And legal studies is a perfect one, because they could be going into the field of law where human trafficking might be something that would be an area that they would like to focus on.
All right, well, thank you very much for joining me today, Professor Berry.
Thank you, Caitlin. I really appreciate it.
All right. For Cardinal Television, I'm Caitlin Murphy.